Lisa had always been the type of person who worked hard for everything she got. Growing up in a small town where opportunities were few, she learned early that success meant putting in extra hours and never giving up. At 24, she finally landed her dream job at Riverside Marketing, a growing company in the heart of downtown. The pay was good, the office was modern, and for the first time in her life, she felt like she was on the right track. Her younger brother Jake was starting his second year of college, and Lisa was determined to help him finish his degree. Their parents had passed away in a car accident 3 years ago, leaving Lisa to take care of everything. Jake was brilliant, studying computer science with dreams of becoming a software engineer. But college was expensive, and without their parents' support, it all fell on Lisa's shoulders. She didn't mind the responsibility, though. Jake was her only family, and she would do anything to see him succeed. The first few weeks at Riverside Marketing were everything Lisa had hoped for. She worked as a marketing coordinator, helping create campaigns for local businesses. Her colleagues were friendly, the work was interesting, and her boss, Mr. Thompson, seemed pleased with her performance. Lisa often stayed late, eager to prove herself and maybe earn a promotion that would help with Jake's tuition costs. But after about a month, things started to change. It began with small comments from Derek, the marketing supervisor. Derek was in his early 40s, married with 2 kids, and had been with the company for over 5 years. At first, his comments seemed harmless enough. He would compliment Lisa's outfits or mention how nice she looked that day. Lisa felt a bit uncomfortable, but she told herself he was just being friendly. After all, she was new, and maybe this was just how things worked in a professional office. As weeks passed, Derek's behavior became more noticeable. He would find excuses to come to her desk, often standing closer than necessary while reviewing her work. His compliments became more personal, commenting on her hair, her perfume, or how she looked in certain colors. Lisa started to feel uneasy, but she needed this job desperately. Jake's next semester payment was due soon, and she couldn't afford to cause any problems at work. The situation escalated when Derek began making jokes that made Lisa uncomfortable. He would make comments about her dating life, asking if she had a boyfriend and suggesting that she must have men lining up to date her. When other colleagues were around, he would act professionally, but when they were alone, his behavior changed completely. Lisa found herself avoiding situations where she might be alone with him, but in a small office it was nearly impossible. One evening, as Lisa was working late to finish a presentation for the next day, Derek approached her desk. The office was almost empty, with just a few people scattered across different floors. He pulled up a chair next to her, sitting uncomfortably close. Lisa could smell his cologne, which made her stomach turn. He leaned over her shoulder, pretending to look at her computer screen, but his hand brushed against her arm. "You know, Lisa," Derek said, his voice lower than usual, "I've been watching your work closely. You're very talented, and I think you have real potential for growth here." Lisa tried to focus on her computer screen, hoping he would get the hint and leave. But Derek continued, "I've been thinking about recommending you for the senior coordinator position that's opening up next month. It comes with a significant pay raise." Lisa's heart skipped a beat. A promotion and pay raise were exactly what she needed for Jake's education. But something about Derek's tone made her nervous. "That would be wonderful, Mr. Derek," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I've been working really hard, and I hope my performance speaks for itself." Derek chuckled and moved his chair even closer. "Well, that's the thing about this company, Lisa. Performance is important, but relationships matter too. You have to know how to work with people, how to be flexible." The way he said the word flexible made Lisa's skin crawl. She understood exactly what he was implying. Over the next few weeks, Derek's behavior became increasingly inappropriate. He would find reasons to call Lisa into his office, closing the door behind her. During these meetings, he would make comments about her appearance, suggest that she should wear certain outfits, and hint that her career advancement depended on how well they worked together. Lisa felt trapped between her desperate need for the job and her growing discomfort with Derek's advances. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening in late October. Lisa had stayed late again working on a campaign for a major client. The office was particularly quiet that night, with most employees having left for a company happy hour that Lisa had skipped. She needed to finish the project and couldn't afford to socialize when Jake's tuition payment was due the following week. She was gathering her materials from the supply room. Derek appeared in the doorway. Lisa's heart sank as she realized she was alone with him in the small, windowless room. "Working late again, I see," Derek said, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. "You know, Lisa, I've been very patient with you. I've been trying to help your career, but I feel like you're not showing much appreciation." Lisa felt her pulse quicken. She was trapped between Derek and the back wall of the supply room, with shelves of office supplies on either side. "I do appreciate the opportunities, Mr. Derek," she said, trying to keep her voice calm. "I think my work quality shows how much I value this job." Derek stepped closer, his expression changing to something that made Lisa's blood run cold. "That's not the kind of appreciation I'm talking about, and you know it," he said, his voice taking on an aggressive tone. "I've been dropping hints for months now. The promotion, the pay raise, your future here, it all depends on how cooperative you're willing to be." Lisa felt panic rising in her chest. She looked around the small room, realizing there was no way out unless Derek moved aside. Her mind raced, thinking about Jake, about the tuition payment, about all the hard work she had put into this job. But she also thought about her dignity, her safety, and her right to work without being harassed. "I don't understand what you're suggesting," Lisa said, though she understood perfectly. She was hoping that playing dumb might give her a chance. To escape the situation, Derek's patience seemed to snap. He stepped even closer, now only inches away from Lisa. "Stop playing games," he said, his voice harsh. "You're a smart girl. You know exactly what I want, and you know what's at stake here. You can either make this easy for both of us, or you can find yourself looking for a new job. And trust me, I have connections in this industry. One word from me and you'll never work in marketing again." Lisa felt tears forming in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She thought about her parents, about how they had raised her to stand up for herself. She thought about Jake and how disappointed he would be if he knew what was happening. But most importantly, she thought about her own self-respect and refused to let Derek take that away from her. The supply room felt like it was getting smaller by the second. Derek's presence was overwhelming, and Lisa knew she had to act fast. This was the moment that would define not just her career, but her entire future. She had to make a choice between her financial security and her personal dignity, between keeping quiet and speaking up, between accepting Derek's demands and fighting back. Little did she know that her decision in that moment would change everything. Not just for her, but for everyone at Riverside Marketing. Robert Blackwell had always been a man who believed in doing the right thing. At 58 years old, he had built Riverside Marketing from nothing more than a small office and a big dream. 22 years ago, he started the company with just himself and one assistant working 16-hour days to make ends meet. Now, his company employed over 100 people across 3 floors of a downtown building, and he was proud of what he had created, but success hadn't changed Robert's core values. He still remembered what it felt like to struggle, to work multiple jobs just to pay rent, to wonder if his dreams would ever become reality. That's why he tried to create a workplace where people could grow, where hard work was rewarded, and where everyone felt safe and respected. His own daughter was about Lisa's age, and he often thought about the kind of workplace he would want for her. On that Thursday evening in October, Robert was in his corner office on the 3rd floor, reviewing quarterly reports. The numbers were good, better than expected, and he was planning to announce bonuses for the entire team the following week. He loved these quiet evening hours when the office was peaceful and he could think clearly. Most of his employees had left for the company happy hour, but Robert had decided to skip it this time. He wanted to finish the financial review so he could spend the weekend with his wife and grandchildren. As he worked, Robert noticed that the building seemed quieter than usual. Even for a late evening, there was an unusual stillness in the air. He had always been aware of his surroundings, a habit developed from years of running a business and caring about his employees' well-being. He made it a point to know who was working late, partly for security reasons and partly because he genuinely cared about his team's work-life balance. Around 8:30, Robert decided to take a break and walk around the office. He often did this when working late, checking to make sure everything was secure and seeing if anyone needed help with their projects. As he left his office, he noticed lights still on in the marketing department. He smiled, thinking about how dedicated his team was, but also made a mental note to remind them about the importance of rest. As Robert walked down the hallway, he heard voices coming from the direction of the supply room. At first, he thought it might be two employees having a work discussion, but something about the tone made him pause. The voices were muffled, but he could sense tension in the air. His instincts, sharpened by years of managing people and reading situations, told him something wasn't right. Robert had always prided himself on being aware of workplace dynamics. He knew that his position as CEO meant that employees might not always feel comfortable coming to him with problems, so he made an extra effort to observe and listen. He had noticed changes in Lisa's behavior over the past few weeks. She had become quieter in meetings, less likely to speak up with her usually creative ideas. He had also seen her leaving promptly at 5 o'clock when she used to stay late working on projects. At the time, Robert had wondered if Lisa was going through personal difficulties. He knew she was supporting her brother through college, and he had been considering offering her additional responsibilities that would come with a pay increase. But now, standing in the hallway and hearing the strained voices, he began to wonder if there was more to Lisa's changed behavior than he had realized. Robert moved closer to the supply room, not wanting to eavesdrop but concerned about what he was hearing. The voices became clearer, and he recognized Derek's voice along with Lisa's. But the tone of the conversation was unlike any professional discussion he had ever heard. Derek's voice sounded aggressive, demanding, while Lisa's voice seemed strained and frightened. As Robert approached the supply room, he could hear Derek saying something about cooperation and appreciation. The words sent a chill down Robert's spine. In his 22 years of running the company, he had dealt with various workplace issues, but he had never encountered anything like this. His heart began to race as he realized what might be happening. Robert thought about his own company policies, the sexual harassment training they conducted annually, and the zero-tolerance policy he had implemented. He had always believed these measures were sufficient, that his company culture was strong enough to prevent such situations. But now, faced with the possibility that one of his supervisors was harassing an employee, he felt a mixture of anger, disappointment, and determination. The conversation in the supply room continued, and Robert could hear Derek's voice becoming more insistent. Lisa's responses were becoming shorter, more desperate. Robert's protective instincts kicked in, the same instincts he felt when his own daughter faced difficulties. He knew he had to act, but he also knew he needed to be careful. He needed to see what was happening with his own eyes before making any decisions. Robert positioned himself where he could see into the supply room through the partially open door. What he saw made his blood boil. Derek was standing uncomfortably close to Lisa, who was backed against the wall with shelves of supplies on either side. Lisa's body language spoke volumes. She was clearly uncomfortable, frightened, and trapped. Derek was leaning over her in a way that was unmistakably threatening and inappropriate. For a moment, Robert felt like he was watching a scene from a nightmare. This was his company, his workplace, and one of his employees was being harassed by a supervisor. He thought about all the speeches he had given about respect and professionalism, all the policies he had put in place, and all the trust his employees had placed in him to create a safe working environment. Robert watched as Derek moved even closer to Lisa, his voice becoming more aggressive. Lisa was pressed against the wall, clearly trying to maintain some distance, but Derek wasn't giving her any space. Robert could see the fear in Lisa's eyes, the way she was looking around the small room as if searching for an escape route. Then, Derek reached out as if to touch Lisa's arm. That's when Lisa's composure finally broke. Her voice, which had been quiet and controlled, suddenly became loud and clear. "Don't stand there. she shouted, her voice echoing through the supply room and into the hallway. The desperation in her voice was unmistakable, and Robert knew she wasn't just talking to Derek, she was calling for help, hoping someone would hear her. The moment Lisa shouted, everything became crystal clear to Robert. This wasn't just an uncomfortable conversation or a misunderstanding. This was harassment, plain and simple. Derek was using his position of power to intimidate and threaten a young employee who depended on her job. Lisa's changed behavior over the past week suddenly made perfect sense. She had been dealing with this situation alone, probably afraid to speak up because she needed the job. Robert's mind raced as he processed what he was witnessing. He thought about Lisa's dedication to her work, her bright ideas in meetings, and her obvious commitment to her family. He thought about Derek, who had been with the company for 5 years and had always seemed professional. But most importantly, he thought about his responsibility as a leader, as a protector of his employees, and as a human being who couldn't stand by and watch someone being harmed. The sound of Lisa's voice, desperate and frightened, cut through Robert like a knife. He knew that this moment would define not just Lisa's future, but his own character as a leader. This was the moment when he had to choose between looking the other way and taking action, between protecting his company's reputation and protecting his employees' safety. Robert stepped forward, his decision made. He knew exactly what he had to do, and he knew there was no time to waste. Lisa's safety was his priority, and Derek's behavior was not just inappropriate, it was criminal. As he moved toward the supply room, Robert was already reaching for his phone, knowing that this situation required more than just company discipline. This required the police. Robert's mind was racing as he stood in the hallway, processing what he had just witnessed. The sound of Lisa's desperate voice echoing through the supply room had shaken him to his core. In all his years of running Riverside marketing, he had never imagined that something like this could be happening under his own roof. But now, faced with the undeniable truth, everything began to make perfect sense. As Robert watched Derek step back from Lisa, clearly startled by her outburst, memories began flooding back. He remembered the day 3 months ago when Lisa had first started working late. She had been so enthusiastic, so eager to prove herself. She would stay until 7 or 8 in the evening, working on projects with a smile on her face. Robert had been impressed by her dedication and had even mentioned to his wife how refreshing it was to see such a motivated young employee, but then things had changed. Robert now realized that the change had been gradual, so subtle that he hadn't noticed it at first. Lisa had started leaving the office exactly at 5 o'clock, no longer staying late to perfect her work. During team meetings, she had become quieter, less likely to share her creative ideas. When she did speak, she seemed nervous, constantly glancing around the room as if checking who was listening. Robert remembered a particular incident from 2 weeks ago. He had been walking past the marketing department when he noticed Lisa quickly stepping away from her desk as Derek approached. At the time, he had thought nothing of it. Maybe she was just going to get coffee or use the restroom. But now, remembering the uncomfortable look on her face and the way Derek had lingered by her desk, Robert understood what had really been happening. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together in Robert's mind like a horrible picture he wished he didn't have to see. He thought about Derek's behavior over the past few months. Derek had always been friendly with the female employees, but Robert had never considered that his friendliness might cross professional boundaries. Derek was married with 2 young children, and Robert had always viewed him as a family man who understood the importance of respect and professionalism, but now Robert was seeing Derek's actions in a completely different light. He remembered Derek's comments during staff meetings about Lisa's dedication and how she was really committed to getting ahead. At the time, Robert had thought Derek was simply recognizing Lisa's hard work, but now he understood the sinister undertone in those comments. Derek hadn't been praising Lisa's professional skills, he had been making veiled references to something far more disturbing. Robert's anger began to build as he realized how blind he had been. He prided himself on being an observant leader, someone who cared about his employees' well-being. But somehow, he had missed the signs that one of his supervisors was harassing a young employee. He felt a deep sense of responsibility and guilt. Lisa had been suffering in silence, probably afraid to speak up because she needed the job to support her brother's education. The thought of Lisa's situation made Robert's heart ache. He knew from her employment file that she was supporting her younger brother through college after their parents had passed away. She was carrying a heavy burden at such a young age, and instead of finding support and encouragement at work, she had been facing harassment and intimidation. Robert couldn't imagine how frightening and isolating that must have been for her. As Robert continued to watch the scene in the supply room, he noticed other details that confirmed his worst fears. Derek was still standing too close to Lisa, even after her outburst. His body language was aggressive, and he seemed to be trying to regain control of the situation. Lisa, on the other hand, was pressed against the wall, her arms crossed protectively over her chest. She looked like a trapped animal. Desperately seeking an escape route, Robert realized that this wasn't just about one incident in a supply room. This was about a pattern of behavior that had been going on for months. Derek had been systematically using his position of power to intimidate and harass Lisa. He had probably made it clear that her job security and career advancement depended on her compliance with his inappropriate demands. The more Robert thought about it, the more his anger grew. He thought about his own daughter, who was about Lisa's age and working at her first professional job in another city. The idea of someone treating his daughter the way Derek had been treating Lisa made his blood boil. But beyond his personal feelings, Robert was deeply disturbed by the violation of trust that had occurred in his company. Robert had always believed that his company was different, that his emphasis on respect and professionalism created a safe working environment. He had implemented sexual harassment training, created an open-door policy, and established what he thought were clear boundaries. But now he realized that policies and training meant nothing if supervisors like Derek were willing to abuse their power when no one was watching. The realization hit Robert like a physical blow. How many other employees might be suffering in silence? How many other incidents had he missed because he had been too focused on the business side of things and not paying enough attention to the human dynamics in his workplace? The thought that there might be other victims made Robert feel sick to his stomach. Robert also began to understand the broader implications of what he was witnessing. If word got out that his company had a harassment problem, it could destroy everything he had built over the past 22 years. His reputation in the business community, his relationships with clients, and the trust of his employees would all be at risk. But more importantly, his failure to protect Lisa meant that he had failed in his most fundamental responsibility as a leader. As Robert watched Derek continued to intimidate Lisa, he realized that this moment would define not just his character, but the character of his entire company. He could choose to handle this quietly, to move Derek to another position, or perhaps let him resign without making a fuss. That would protect the company's reputation and avoid any negative publicity. But it would also mean that Derek might continue his behavior elsewhere, and other women might become victims, Robert thought, about the values he had tried to instill in his company from the very beginning. He had always told his employees that they were like family, that they could count on him to support them and protect them. But now he realized that his words meant nothing if he wasn't willing to take action when it really mattered. The sound of Lisa's voice still echoed in Robert's mind. "Don't stand there," she had shouted, and Robert understood that she hadn't just been talking to Derek. She had been calling for help, hoping that someone would hear her and come to her aid. She had been begging for someone to do something, to not just stand by and watch while she was being harassed and intimidated. Robert's decision crystallized in that moment. He couldn't just stand there and watch. He couldn't handle this quietly or sweep it under the rug. Lisa deserved better than that, and so did every other employee who trusted him to create a safe working environment. This wasn't just about protecting his company's reputation. This was about doing what was right, regardless of the consequences. Robert knew that once he stepped into that supply room, there would be no going back. He would have to face the ugly truth about what had been happening in his company, and he would have to take action that might be difficult and uncomfortable. But he also knew that he had no choice. His conscience, his values, and his responsibility to his employees demanded that he act immediately. As Robert prepared to confront Derek and rescue Lisa from her terrifying situation, he made a silent promise to himself and to her. He would not just handle this as an internal company matter. This was a crime, and it deserved to be treated as such. Derek's behavior was not just inappropriate, it was criminal harassment and intimidation. And Robert knew exactly what he had to do about it. Robert took a deep breath and stepped forward into the supply room. The moment he appeared in the doorway, both Derek and Lisa turned to look at him with completely different expressions. Lisa's face showed immediate relief, like someone who had been drowning and suddenly saw a lifeline. Derek, on the other hand, looked like a deer caught in headlights, his face instantly going pale as he realized his boss had witnessed everything. "What's going on here?" Robert asked, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable authority. Even though he already knew exactly what was happening, he wanted to give Derek a chance to explain himself, to see if he would try to lie his way out of the situation or if he would have the decency to admit what he had been doing. Derek immediately stepped back from Lisa, creating distance between them for the first time since Robert had started watching. "Oh, Mr. Blackwell," Derek stammered, his voice shaking slightly. "We were just discussing a project. Lisa was having some questions about the campaign we're working on, and I was just helping her understand the requirements." Robert looked at Derek with disgust. Even caught in the act, Derek was trying to lie and manipulate the situation. Robert then looked at Lisa, who was still pressed against the wall, her face flushed and her hands trembling slightly. Her eyes met his, and he could see the fear and desperation there. She looked like she wanted to speak but was afraid of the consequences. "Lisa," Robert said gently, "are you all right? Do you need to discuss a project at this time of night in a supply room with the door closed?" His tone was kind and encouraging. Letting her know that it was safe to tell the truth, Lisa looked between Robert and Derek, clearly struggling with what to say. Robert could see the internal battle playing out on her face. She was probably thinking about her job, about her brother's college tuition, about all the reasons why she had been afraid to speak up until now. But she was also thinking about her dignity, her safety, and the fact that her boss had just witnessed what was happening. I was just getting supplies for my project," Lisa said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Derek, Mr. Derek came in and Ed." She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "Then what, Lisa?" Robert asked, his voice still gentle, but firm. "What did Derek do?" Derek jumped in before Lisa could answer. "Nothing happened, Mr. Blackwell. This is all just a misunderstanding. Lisa and I were having a professional conversation about her work performance and her potential for advancement. Sometimes these discussions can get a bit intense, but it's all completely appropriate." Robert felt his anger rising at Derek's continued lies. The man was not only a predator but also a coward who was trying to gaslight both Lisa and Robert about what had clearly happened. Robert had seen enough workplace situations to know the difference between a professional conversation and what he had witnessed. "Derek," Robert said, his voice now carrying a sharp edge, "I need you to step away from Lisa right now. In fact, I need you to leave this room completely and wait for me in the hallway." Derek's face went through several different expressions in the span of a few seconds. First confusion, then anger, then something that looked like panic. "Mr. Blackwell, I think there's been a serious misunderstanding here. I've been with this company for 5 years and I've never had any problems with anyone. I'm a married man with children. I would never do anything inappropriate." "Derek," Robert said, his voice now completely cold and authoritative, "I'm not asking you to leave the room. I'm telling you to leave the room, now." Derek looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Robert's expression made him think better of it. He walked toward the door, but as he passed Lisa, he leaned slightly toward her and whispered something that only she could hear. Lisa flinched and pressed herself even further against the wall. "What did you just say to her?" Robert demanded. his voice now showing his full anger. "Nothing," Derek said quickly. "I just told her that I hoped she would think carefully about any decisions she makes tonight." That was the final straw for Robert. The threat in Derek's words was unmistakable. Even with his boss standing right there, Derek was still trying to intimidate Lisa and influence her testimony. Robert realized that Derek was not just a predator but a calculating manipulator who had probably done this before. "Derek, you need to leave this building immediately," Robert said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Security will escort you out, and you are not to return to this office until further notice." Derek's face went through another series of expressions. "Mr. Blackwell, you can't be serious. This is all based on a misunderstanding. If you would just let me explain." "There's nothing to explain," Robert interrupted. "I saw what I saw and I heard what I heard. Lisa told you to stop and you didn't stop. That's not a misunderstanding. That's harassment." Derek tried one more approach. "Sir, I understand you're upset, but surely we can handle this internally. There's no need to involve anyone else. I'm sure Lisa doesn't want to make a big deal out of this either. These things happen in offices sometimes, and the best thing is to just move on and forget about it." Robert couldn't believe what he was hearing. Derek was not only trying to save his own job, but also trying to pressure Lisa into staying quiet about what had happened. The man clearly had no understanding of the seriousness of his actions or the impact they had on Lisa. "Derek, I want you to listen to me very carefully," Robert said, pulling out his phone. "What you did to Lisa is not something that happens in offices sometimes. It's harassment, and it's probably criminal. This is not going to be handled internally, and this is not going to be forgotten." Derek's eyes went wide when he saw Robert's phone. "Mr. Blackwell, what are you doing? Surely we can work this out between us. I have a family to think about. I have a mortgage and kids who depend on me." "You should have thought about your family before you decided to harass a young woman who trusted you to be a professional supervisor," Robert replied, his finger hovering over the phone. "Lisa has a family too. She has a brother who depends on her, and she has the right to work in a safe environment without being threatened and intimidated." Robert looked at Lisa, who was watching the entire exchange with a mixture of fear and amazement. "Lisa, I'm going to call the police now. What Derek did to you is not just against company policy, it's against the law. You have the right to work without being harassed, and you have the right to have this situation handled properly." Lisa's eyes filled with tears, but this time they seemed to be tears of relief rather than fear. "Thank you," she whispered. Derek made one last desperate attempt to change Robert's mind. "Mr. Blackwell, please, I'm begging you. I made a mistake, but I can change. I can transfer to another department, or I can take a leave of absence. Please don't involve the police." Robert looked at Derek with complete disgust. "Derek, you didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. You chose to use your position of power to intimidate and threaten a young employee. You chose to continue even when she told you to stop. And even now, you're choosing to try to manipulate the situation instead of taking responsibility for what you did." Robert began dialing the police number. "The time for handling this quietly is over. Lisa deserves justice, and other women deserve to be protected from you in the future." As Robert placed the call, he kept his eyes on Derek to make sure he didn't try to approach Lisa again or leave the building. He also watched Lisa, who seemed to be gradually coming out of her state of shock and fear. For the first time since he had entered the supply room, she was standing up straight instead of cowering against the wall. The dispatcher answered the phone, and Robert spoke clearly and calmly. "I need to report a case of workplace harassment that just occurred at my company. The victim is here with me, and the perpetrator is still on the premises." The police arrived at Riverside Marketing within 15 minutes of Robert's call. 2 officers, a woman named Officer Martinez and a man named Officer Johnson, entered the building with serious expressions. Robert met them at the entrance and quickly explained the situation. He was impressed by their professionalism and the way they immediately understood the gravity of what had happened. Officer Martinez took charge of interviewing Lisa, while Officer Johnson spoke with Derek. Robert watched as Derek's confident demeanor completely crumbled when he realized that the police were taking the situation seriously. All of his earlier attempts to downplay what had happened suddenly seemed pathetic and desperate. Lisa was initially nervous about speaking to the police, but Officer Martinez had a gentle way of asking questions that made her feel comfortable. As Lisa began to tell her story, Robert could see the relief on her face. For months, she had been carrying this burden alone, afraid to speak up because she needed her job. Now, finally, someone was listening to her and taking her seriously. During Lisa's interview, she revealed that Derek's harassment had been going on for over 2 months. It had started with inappropriate comments about her appearance, then escalated to unwanted touching, and finally to the threats about her job security that Robert had witnessed. Lisa also mentioned that Derek had made it clear that her chances for promotion depended on her willingness to cooperate with his demands. As Officer Martinez took Lisa's statement, more details emerged that made Robert's blood boil. Derek had been very careful about when and where he harassed Lisa, always making sure they were alone and that there were no witnesses. He had threatened to fire her if she told anyone, and he had also threatened to make sure she never worked in marketing. Again, if she didn't comply with his demands, Officer Johnson's interview with Derek was much shorter. Derek continued to deny everything at first, claiming that it was all a misunderstanding. But when Officer Johnson explained that they had a detailed statement from Lisa and that Robert had witnessed part of the harassment, Derek's story began to fall apart. Eventually, he admitted that he had made some inappropriate comments but claimed that he had never threatened Lisa's job. The police investigation revealed that Derek had been using his position as a supervisor to target vulnerable employees. Lisa wasn't his first victim. When word got out about Derek's arrest, 2 other women who had previously worked at the company came forward with similar stories. Both had left their jobs because of Derek's harassment, but they had been too afraid to report it at the time. Robert was devastated to learn that Derek had been harassing multiple employees over the years. He felt like he had failed as a leader and as a human being. How had he missed the signs? How had he allowed this to continue for so long? The guilt was overwhelming. But Robert knew that feeling sorry for himself wouldn't help Lisa or the other victims. The legal process moved quickly. Derek was charged with sexual harassment and intimidation, and he was also fired from Riverside Marketing immediately. His wife filed for divorce within a month, and he lost his house because he couldn't make the mortgage payments without his job. The consequences of his actions were severe and lasting. Meanwhile, Robert focused on making sure that Lisa received all the support she needed. He arranged for her to have access to counseling services, and he assured her that her job was completely secure. He also gave her a significant raise and promoted her to a senior position, recognizing both her talent and her courage in speaking up. But Robert knew that supporting Lisa was just the beginning. He realized that he needed to completely overhaul his company's approach to preventing harassment. He hired an outside consultant to conduct a comprehensive review of the company's policies and procedures. He also implemented a new reporting system that allowed employees to report problems anonymously. Without fear of retaliation, Robert established a victim support fund that would provide counseling and legal assistance to any employee who experienced harassment. He also created a zero-tolerance policy that made it clear that anyone who engaged in harassment would be immediately terminated and reported to the police. There would be no second chances, no quiet resignations, and no covering up of problems. The changes at Riverside Marketing were noticed by other companies in the industry. Robert began speaking at conferences about the importance of creating truly safe workplaces. He was honest about his own failures and about how he had missed the signs of harassment in his own company. His willingness to admit his mistakes and to take responsibility made his message even more powerful. Lisa became an advocate for workplace safety, speaking at companies and universities about the importance of speaking up about harassment. She shared her story with courage and dignity, helping other victims understand that they were not alone and that it was possible to get justice. Her brother Jake was incredibly proud of her strength and bravery. The case against Derek went to trial 6 months later. Lisa testified about what had happened, describing in detail how Derek had used his position to intimidate and threaten her. She spoke about the fear she had felt, the isolation, and the difficult choice between her job security and her personal safety. Her testimony was powerful and moving, and it clearly showed the impact that Derek's actions had on her life. Robert also testified at the trial, describing what he had witnessed and explaining how he had failed to notice the earlier signs of harassment. He spoke about his responsibility as a leader and his commitment to making sure that nothing like this would ever happen again at his company. His testimony helped establish the seriousness of the situation and the impact on the entire workplace. Derek was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to 2 years in prison. He was also ordered to pay damages to Lisa and the other victims. The judge made it clear that using a position of power to harass and intimidate employees was a serious crime. That would not be tolerated. The trial received significant media attention, and Robert's handling of the situation was widely praised. Business leaders from across the country reached out to him, asking for advice on how to prevent harassment in their own companies. Robert always emphasized that prevention was better than punishment and that leaders needed to be actively involved. In creating safe workplaces, Lisa thrived in her new position at Riverside Marketing. She developed innovative marketing campaigns that helped the company grow significantly. She also became a mentor to other young employees, helping them navigate the challenges of starting their careers. Her brother Jake graduated from college with honors, and he often said that Lisa's strength and courage had inspired him to work harder and never give up. 5 years later, Lisa was promoted to marketing director, becoming one of the youngest people in the company's history to reach that level. She had turned her traumatic experience into a source of strength and purpose. She used her position to advocate for other employees and to make sure that everyone felt safe and respected at work. Robert retired from Riverside Marketing at the age of 65, but he remained involved in workplace safety advocacy. He established a foundation that provided resources and support to companies that wanted to improve their harassment prevention programs. He also funded scholarships for young people who had overcome workplace harassment, helping them continue their education and rebuild their careers. The story of what happened at Riverside Marketing became a case study in business schools and law schools across the country. It showed how quickly a workplace situation could escalate, how important it was for leaders to take immediate action, and how much impact one person's courage could have on changing an entire company culture. Lisa often reflected on that night in the supply room and how her life had changed forever. She had found her voice, stood up for herself, and helped protect other women from experiencing what she had gone through. Her shouted words, "Don't stand there," had become a rallying cry for anyone who witnessed harassment or injustice. The message was clear: don't be a bystander, don't stay silent, and don't let bad things happen when you have the power to stop them.